Hi, my name is Nikki Grubbs, and I'm here with North Thurston Public Schools to share a little bit about secondary schools grading practices shifts. Today's learning targets are about the history of the grading practices shifts in the district, understanding the purpose of the shifts in grading practices, familiarizing ourselves with 4 principles for grading, dispelling myths, and taking a look at our resource page in grading practices. Today's success criteria are that you would be able to share the purpose of the shift in grading practices with your neighbor or even your student. You should be able to explain why the 0 to 100 point scale is inaccurate and inequitable. You'll also be able to debunk common misconceptions about the new grading practices shifts. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the work. Our district-wide grading and reporting practices started in 2018. A 25-person 6th through 12th grade representation of teachers began a task force in 2018. The task force conducted research about grading practices and learned together. They recommended 4 grading principles to the board in 2019. The school board convened a community conversation in the fall of 2021. From there, the school board affirmed the 4 grading principles and required 3 areas to be strengthened in our district. And the first is consistency. We heard from parents that teachers were grading differently from class to class. We also wanted strong communication, ensuring that teachers are very sure about what standards and learning targets they want kids to learn. And most importantly, we wanted to empower our students so that they felt that they could grasp onto their own learning and be in charge of what they know and can show to teachers. The first principle that was developed is grades must clearly communicate student success towards learning standards. Assignments and assessments are aligned to learning standards, and for daily lessons, there's a very clear learning target so that kids know exactly what they're supposed to learn and be able to do to show the teacher that they know it or can do it. A 4-point summative grading scale was charged to be implemented by all secondary schools beginning to phase in the year 2023 to 24, this year, with a complete phase in by next year, 2024 to 25. Extra credit is optional for teachers, but we want it to be related to coursework, and it should be limited in scope. Principle number 2 has to do with students having multiple opportunities to show what they know and can understand. Principle number 3 is about students needing time to practice and learn from their mistakes. Therefore, teachers are expected to provide a variety of assessment methods. Assessment is kind of a fancy word for tests or projects or other assignments that show the teacher what kids know and understand. And we wanted to give kids more opportunities to retake tests. Most importantly, we want teachers to be able to use the information that they're getting from assessment and shape their next day's instruction for kids. Principle number 4 is about supporting the learning through regular communication with families about student progress. We want teachers to formally report progress 4 times a year through report cards, progress reports, and conferences. The district's online gradebook, known as Cumulative or Skyward, should be updated every 2 weeks and always available for parents and students. With our task force, we engaged in a book study, particularly with the book Grading for Equity, as shown on the screen by Joe Feldman. It incorporates research from a number of years and a number of different researchers who've been studying the effects of grading on student learning. Through this text, we've learned about the 3 pillars of equitable grading practices. We want grades to be accurate, using calculations that are mathematically sound, easy to understand, and correctly describe a student's level of performance. We also want our grades to be bias resistant. It should be based on valid evidence of what a student understands, their knowledge, and their skill level. And then finally, we want our grades to be a source of motivation for kids. We want them to be able to see that when they put in effort and they are very clear about what they need to do to reach a standard, it empowers the kids so that they feel in control of their learning and that they can see the results of their effort. The equitable grading practices supports the strategic plan of North Thurston Public Schools. One of the goals in our plan is continuous growth, all students, all subjects. We're looking for an increased percentage of students demonstrating proficiency on standards during state testing, as well as more students passing their classes and increasing our graduation rates from high school. But why should we focus on grading practices? The whole reason is around equitable opportunities for learning for kids. A shift in our grading practices will improve learning for kids. It'll be more equitable for kids who have been historically underserved. We want grades to reflect student learning, not student behavior. The focus here shifts to learning instead of just earning points or making the teacher happy. When teachers are really clear about what's expected for learning, it builds and strengthens trust between the teacher and the students. One of the pillars is around accuracy. Grading must use calculations to be mathematically sound, easy to understand, and correctly describe a student's level of academic performance. One of the issues is with the 0 to 100 point scale that many of us know and had in our own schooling experience. But there's problems with the 0 to 100 point scale. So we want to talk about that. We're shifting to the use of a 0 to 4 point scale. Ideally, we want to weight more recent performance when it's appropriate, depending on the subject matter. And we want our grades to be based on an individual's achievement, not on group work. Let's talk about problems with traditional grading. In the traditional grade scale, 0 to 100, 60 of the 100 points is dedicated to an F. The traditional scale dedicates 40 of its numbers to passing. Failure occupies 3 times the area of the 100-point scale as it does to success. 2/3 of the traditional scale is dedicated to failure. Here's what it looks like. In a traditional grading scale, the F makes up most of the scale. So we're emphasizing failure. But in a standards reference grading scale, the 0 to 4-point scale, there is an equal increment of points for each of the letter grades. Let me show you another way. These two scales also show you the same representation. A traditional grading scale dedicates 60% of its scale to the F, whereas each letter grade of the 4-point scale is equally represented and easier to earn. These are all the secondary schools in our district. This chart shows you which content areas in each school is trying their hand at implementing the 4-point scale. Some of the other content areas are still on a 0 to 100-point scale, and this year, teachers are learning how to use the 0 to 4-point scale. They're also creating something called rubrics. Those are tools that teachers use to provide teacher clarity for kids, and I'll show you a bit about that soon. We want to make sure our grades are bias resistant. This provides opportunity to succeed regardless of privilege. It resists subjective biases such as race, gender, family income, first language, or special needs. Some practices that help to eliminate inherent bias is grading based on content, not on extra credit. We don't want too much of the grade to be focused on extra credit, but on the standards or the learning targets. Grades should be based on student work, not the timing of the work. If a student is late to turn something in, he shouldn't just be excused from submitting the work. We should still expect that student to do the work and, more importantly, to have the learning. We expect non-grade consequences for cheating. If a student is caught cheating, he or she might have some discipline or consequences such as detention or more. But we don't want a student to have an F because it doesn't clearly show what the student knows. They're getting double punished for cheating. So we still expect students to do the work if they are caught cheating. We don't want to include participation and effort into the grade because really it's about the learning. What have the students learned and how are they showing that they've met the daily learning target or the standard for the course? Grades should be based on summative assessments, which are generally the final projects or tests towards the end of a unit or a quarter or a semester. They shouldn't be graded for practice work like homework. Grades should be motivational. Our grading shifts promote a growth mindset. It encourages students to take risks. We avoid penalizing students for mistake during practice runs. And we help students to see how effort connects to outcomes. Some practices that help are the use of a 4-point scale, renaming of grades, such as using the term proficient or advanced, using rubrics, standards reference grades. So that means that all assignments and tasks are based on that content area standard and not on some random assignment that doesn't connect to the content at all. Especially important is teacher providing feedback or student-to-student feedback. Allowing students to retake assignments or tests and accepting late work. Here's a myth that we want to dispel. Some people think the use of a 4-point scale will result in kids no longer being able to earn an A. The truth is, The 4, which results in an A, is labeled as advanced. Students meeting the daily learning target or the grade level standard can still earn an A, but they're going to show you how they're extending their learning in some other ways. They can apply their learning to a different context, or they can make connections to previous learning in the same course or to different content area learning. Or students can teach it to another student. This is a rubric that teachers developed for other teachers. It shows what a 4, 3, 2, 1, and a 0 means. Something that's different than the elementary schools is that a 4 is advanced. It's still based on the grade level standards, but kids are able to demonstrate complex and nuanced understanding of the skills and concepts. They're able to share with a peer. They can apply or transfer the learning to another situation, and they can make connections to other learning. It does not mean that they have to show learning in the grade level above them. That's a rubric that we use at our elementary school. But in secondary schools, advanced that means that they're learning the learning target and the standard, and they're able to extend their learning and show it and apply it in a new and different way. In a proficient, or a 3, also known as a letter B, a student meets the learning target by demonstrating understanding of the skills, concepts, and ideas in that learning target. Let's look at another myth. Some people think by using a 4-point scale that kids will no longer be able to get into college because of our shift in grading practices. In reality, students continue to get letter grades. In fact, our transcripts won't even show the 4-point scale. They'll show letter grades like they have always shown. Colleges will receive transcripts with letter grades on them and a holistic GPA. Colleges and universities have shown that they're in support of the shift in grading practices. Use of the 4-point scale and use of rubrics aligns better to many college grading practices. Here's how the scale is translated to a letter grade. We've had conversations with local colleges, South Puget Sound Community College, St. Martin's, UW-Tacoma, Central Washington, and Evergreen College, to talk about our shifts in grading practices. All of these colleges are in support of our grading shifts. Another myth that we want to address is an idea that we're changing to a 4-point scale so that all the kids pass, regardless of their performance and their learning. But that's not true. We're changing to a 4-point scale to create greater clarity for kids. Kids will know exactly what they're expected to learn every day that they come to class. And they'll even be shown what they're expected to do to provide that evidence of their learning. More kids will pass because there's more clarity and more teacher or student feedback about what kids need to do next to improve their learning. A 4-point scale focuses on learning rather than earning points as a commodity. Using a 4-point scale makes recovery from the damage of a 0 possible. In the traditional scale, if you get an F, 1 or 2 Fs will cause you to have an almost impossible opportunity to recover your grade and get a passing grade. I wanted to show you the other part of the anchor rubric that teachers made for teachers that shows you what a 1 and a 0 represent. A 1 means that a student is beginning to meet proficiency. The student has not yet met the learning target, but they are providing some evidence of attempting to understand skills, concepts, and ideas. They attempt to demonstrate learning, but they might require some support from a teacher. Evidence may not be completely sufficient for the teacher to see that the student fully understands or can perform a skill. With a 0, which is an F, a student has provided no evidence towards learning the learning target. And often, a student who is absent consistently, well, they're not able to provide the evidence that we need to show that they're learning, and they cannot demonstrate the learning. So attendance is critically important for kids. Here's another myth. Teachers can continue to grade on the 0 to 100 point and use a simple formula to convert to the 4-point scale. We discourage teachers from continuing to use the 0 to 100 point scale because this is a shift in philosophy, and it's about being very clear about what's expected in student learning so that they know how to earn the 2, the 3, and the 4 on the 0 to 4-point scale. The 0 to 100 point scale and the 0 to 4-point scale are two completely different scales that require a philosophical shift in the way we think about grading. The 0 to 100 point scale focuses on failure. If you think about 0 to 100 points, it's really pretty impossible to distinguish among 101 different increments of measurement. For example, to distinguish between a 72 and a 73 would be nearly impossible. However, using the 0 to 4-point scale, it makes it easier to describe exactly what needs to be done to earn that next level in the 0 to 4-point scale. And it also makes it easier to recover from the damage of a 0. This is something we're really focused on in our district: transparency and clarity. What am I learning? Why am I learning it? How will I know if I've learned it? How is my learning connected to prior learning? And how will it prepare me for future learning? What are my goals for my students and why are they important? How is it connected to standards? What will students have to do to practice? And what work will I ask of them? How will I evaluate their work? What information does the grade feedback give students about what they've learned? Teacher clarity, what I just talked about. When teachers are really clear about the learning standards and the daily learning targets, it has a significant impact on positive student learning. A researcher named John Hattie developed a way of synthesizing effects of educational strategies according to something called an effect size. An effect size of a 0.40 is equivalent to 1 year's growth. Teacher clarity has an effect size of 0.75. That's almost 2 years worth of growth. As you can see with this graphic, the desired zone is above a 0.4. Any strategy in education that results in an effect size above a 0.4 is a desired strategy, and teacher clarity is a significant one. When I say teacher clarity, I mean it's really clear to kids what they're expected to learn and what they need to do to show the teacher they know it or can do it. Here's an example of some of Hattie's research and the teacher strategies that result in an effect size. For example, teacher estimates of achievement. That's a 1.62 effect size. That's a huge effect size. And so on and so forth. Teacher clarity is down here at a 0.75. Part of teacher clarity is the posting of learning targets every day. What do teachers want kids to know by the end of the period or within the next couple of lessons? Something called success criteria is what kids will need to do to show the teacher that they've met the learning target. We encourage teachers in North Thurston to post learning targets and success criteria every day for kids and to refer back to it throughout the lesson. The research shows that if kids know what they're expected to do, they're much more likely to achieve those proficiencies and to increase their learning. I mentioned rubrics earlier. What is a rubric? A rubric is a coherent set of criteria for students' work that includes descriptions of levels of performance and quality on the criteria. Here's an example of a rubric. This one's a holistic rubric. It means that we're taking multiple different characteristics or aspects of quality and we're including them in one rubric. And we're going to give an overall score of a 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's a few different kinds of rubrics, and I'm showing you a couple. Another common one's called an analytic rubric, and it consists of many different aspects of learning. So in this rubric, we're looking at the student's claim, the student's evidence, their citations, and their elaboration. So we're looking at 4 different aspects, and we're giving each one of those a score. Teachers may also use checklists and other types of rubrics. This one, for example, is a daily assignment rubric. This same rubric can be used over and over every day for a daily assignment. It's got generalized language, but it applies to every assignment. And finally, I'd like to point you to the Grading Practices webpage on the North Thurston Public Schools webpage. You can simply Google it by putting in North Thurston Public Schools Grading Practices, and you'll get to it. On our grading page, we have all of the elements of grading practices. We have a question and answer guide. I have multiple articles for you to read if you're very interested in the research. And we continue to update it. And I'll even include a video of different webinars. Today, what we've learned is the history of grading practices in North Thurston Public Schools. We learned about the purpose for shifting to grading practices. We got familiar with the 4 principles for grading, and we dispelled some myths about the 4-point scale. We also got to see the Grading Practices webpage. Thank you for participating. Please take down my email if you have any questions. If you email me, I can send you the Q&A, different articles, and I can answer your questions. Thank you for your time.